Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I would like to thank every one of you for making time. I know it's a little bit late in India. I don't know if maybe it's sleeping time or not yet, um, but thank you very much for making this time to get together so we could discuss something very, very important and critical globally, which has a lot of implications on different sectors, and that is basically also not excluding the aviation sector, which most of you are related to. I'm also particularly grateful to Lynn for the invitation to having this opportunity to talk to you today about a very, very important topic of gender-based violence, GBV, and also conflict-related sexual violence, which is called CRSV. We all know that these are very, very big global issues that has significance, importance, and implication on different industries, especially those industries that are very much male-dominated. And I think aviation is also one of those sectors that has been historically and traditionally very male-dominated, and concepts such as GBV and CRSV could be very much significant to those who are practicing in this industry. One of the important things that GBV and CRSV could be having an importance in the aviation sector is it's really undermining the participation, I would say full participation of women in society and also economic activities. And that is also in the industry such as aviation. Whether we are talking about violence in conflict zones or in workplace, it's always essential to talk about these issues and also address how these issues can limit the opportunities for women and girls, I would say. I'll be basically speaking, given the fact that my role has been in diplomacy, and I've also had the chance of working with conflict management and conflict resolution. I'll also try to discuss how diplomacy can help issues like that. I didn't do an introduction for the limitation of time, but I think a brochure has got out of the secretariat of this discussion to everyone. So in case there is a need for me to make a quick introduction of myself, I would just say it for the purpose of this discussion. My name is Naveed Noormal. I'm a former diplomat for Afghanistan. I have served in the mission in the UK. I've also studied conflict management and conflict resolution in the US. I have had the chance of working with different organizations on conflict management and conflict resolution, including Harvard University Asia Foundation and many more. Just to make it more interesting for the audience here, I have done my bachelor's of law in India, so I have a very close tie with the country. And to be very honest with you, I've really loved my experience there. Just back to what we were discussing of how diplomacy can help. As someone who has served as a diplomat in Afghanistan and also have a background of conflict resolution, I can say that diplomacy can play a very important role in addressing these issues, especially when we talk about international dialogues, speaking about peace agreements or any other resolutions such as the UN ones, are key to resolving and sometimes mitigating the impacts of GBV and CRSV. But we have to also make sure that to say that diplomacy does not only stop at the global level. It's not only about diplomacy between the countries, but it's also extending into the policies, including policies that are basically worked out through workplaces and to make sure and to ensure safety and equality in the workplace, diplomacy can also play a role in convincing policies or in basically promoting and lobbying for policies that can address the issues of GBV and CRSV. To basically discuss about GBV and CRSV, I would just make a very quick introduction of how these two key terms are different from each other, and then we can move on discussing further about both topics. I have basically chosen two different case studies for you, so we could discuss it more and understand how practically it can be defined in terms of practicability in the industries. To define the gender-based violence, first, it's basically any harmful act that is directed to an individual based on their gender. So anything that is that could harm an individual because of their gender, that could be called a GBV, gender-based violence. They could include physical violence. They can include sexual harassment. They can include trafficking and even emotional abuse. These are all the examples of gender-based violence. And these acts are mostly rooted in power imbalances and gender discrimination for sure. And they can occur in any setting, including the workplace. I am basically reconfirming about workplace again and again, because that's something which is more practical of what we are discussing today, or basically the audience that is basically listening to this one because of the sector and the industry that they are, which I mean is the aviation. On the other hand, when it comes to conflict-related sexual violence, or CRSV, these are specifically very much related to the time of conflict or war. So any act of violence that's happening during the conflict or a war in a country or in a setting, just to be basically used as a weapon of war to intimidate or to even control the population. In some cases, there have been examples of those kind of violences, basically for controlling population or intimidating the war or conflict. They could be categorized under conflict-related sexual violences. And the victims are often or mostly targeted because of their gender and or their community status. So the difference between gender-based violence and CRSV is that gender-based violence could be happening in any setting, in a peaceful situation, we could say. But when it comes to CRSV, it's mostly the unrest or the conflict or during the wartime. Any violence based on gender of an individual happening could be called CRSV. These issues basically affect millions of women around the world, globally. And according to the statistics from the UN, 1 out of 3 women experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. And when it comes to CRSV, that's also a significant issue in conflict zones. For those who are working in the aviation sector, these issues can create barriers to their advancement in career professionally, and also it can impact their safety and also inclusion in the leadership roles. I'm trying to kind of connect what we are discussing today to the aviation sector because this forum is mostly focusing on this particular industry. So I would want to make that connection more and more visible, so this discussion can become more relevant and impactful to everyone listening to us today. I have chosen 2 case studies for today's discussion. The first one is the case of Afghanistan. You probably all know that Afghanistan has a long history of political instability. This includes the foreign invasions, the civil wars, the Taliban's takeover in late 1990s, and again, Taliban's rule after 2021. these times has all impacted, and there are a lot of cases that could relate to GBV and CRSV. During Taliban's rule in 1990s, there were a strict interpretation of Sharia law that severely restricted women's rights and freedom, including their access to education, to employment, and to public life. And mostly women were banned from working in most sectors. And they could not travel without a male guardian, and they were kind of banned from having education system. And this impacted everyone. So these could, because of the agenda, you could call it a GBV. Women in Afghanistan have faced systematic gender-based violence, including forced marriages, honor killings, domestic violence, and some of them happened as a violence, and some of them were basically culturally accepted and were always ignored by the society, and there were not a lot of legal resources for the victims to basically go towards it and to have justice, or at least change the system or the culture or whatever you may call it. And when it comes to CRSV, the reason I chose Afghanistan and our next case study, DRC, is they have, you can see both GBV and CRSV very easily in these cases. During the Soviet invasion during 1979 or between 1979 and 1989, and later when the civil war happened in Afghanistan, women were systematically raped as a tactic of war. And this is called the CRSV. After Taliban's resurgence, there were some sexual violence is reported as a tool of control, especially in regions where women were seen as political objects. They wanted to control, and these could be some of the examples of GBV and CRSV in the context of Afghanistan, a country that's basically in the same region, South Asian region that we are basically belonging to that region. Again, if I want to connect it to the aviation sector, as I said, women were denied to go to school from education, and those women who wanted to basically work in the aviation sector, they faced both legal and cultural barriers with a few opportunities for training. During Taliban's control, they could not even have the basic education, let alone discussing the aviation. So that was very far from even think about it, or just have the dream of working in the aviation sector. But even in the times of a relative stability, the cultural barriers and also some legal barriers probably were some of the limitations that were kind of limiting women and girls to have access to aviation industry and aviation trainings. Again, on the diplomatic response of what happens for the GBV and CRSV when it happened in Afghanistan. Well, Western countries and international human rights organizations, they consistently pushed for gender equality within Afghanistan's legal system and education system, especially during the past, I would say, 20 years. Not if we take out the last almost 3 or more than 3 years of Taliban's takeover, the 20 years of the republic, the Western countries pushed a lot towards international human rights organizations, and also lobbied a lot to basically address the problem of gender equality in the legal system and education system of Afghanistan. There were some resolutions as well. One of the resolutions that was passed by the Security Council of the United Nations on women, peace, and security, it was basically looking into women's rights and needs to be addressed in conflict resolutions and peace building efforts that was basically undertaken during that time. Countries like the United States, United Kingdom, and UN and other organizations, they also provided some financial supports for women education programs. But by the return of Taliban in 2021, many of these efforts that were made in the past 20 years of during the Republic. When I say the past 20 years, I'm just referring to the time before 2021, before the Taliban took over. So those advancements that were made during the Republic time, they are no more to that level of advancement anymore because they were disrupted, and for that reason, we can say that the disruption that happened there, again, in terms of education and legalities, and also the entire government, again, when it comes to the aviation sector, we can say that, well, people who wanted to work for the piloting, for air traffic control or airport management or anything, they face a lot of these problems. Although there are women still working at the airport, but to discuss positions like piloting or leadership positions or air traffic control or something like that, you wouldn't find women there. First, lack of training, lack of legal barriers, cultural issues, and the change of regime and everything that's basically happening right now in the country. So these are the challenges, or the challenges that are basically posing, or threats that are posed by the country. As a result of the change in the government, or there's coming of Taliban back to power, many women who were studying in the aerospace industry for education, they lost their jobs, or they can't basically pursue a career, and so that's making them vulnerable. And again, because of their gender, so we can basically discuss it as a gender-based violence because the nature of the act was basically due to the gender that the people had. And after the Taliban regained the control in Afghanistan in 2021, many of the rights of the women were rolled back, and this basically escalated the gender-specific violence, I can say. Despite the international pressure on matters like this, the problem still exists, and it hasn't been addressed. So what we can say is that the pressure still needs to be kept consistent, and to ensure that these problems are addressed and women can re-enter back to the workforce in the future, at least, if not at the moment, and to just not shrink those opportunities anymore for any individual, especially because of their gender. Because of the time limitation that we have, I will not be discussing most of the issues very in detail, but I hope I have covered a little bit of how it looks like in our first case study. The second case study that I was thinking of sharing with you is the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. The country has experienced decades of instability. That's basically beginning from the colonial exploitation under Belgium, and this is mostly a resource conflict happening there. After the dictatorship, eventually the civil war began in the 1990s, and during this war, a lot of armed groups were involved, and a lot of sexual violence widely used as a weapon of war in DRC. The country still remains one of the poorest and most conflict-affected countries in the world, with widespread insecurity and systematic issues of governments. The ongoing violence, especially in the eastern part of the country, continues to fuel the poverty and also displacement in the country. And women, especially in the DRC, have been the victim of sexual violence on a massive scale. armed group have used rape and other forms of sexual violence to basically instill fear, break communities, and also assert dominance over territories and economic resources. As we said, the conflict has been over the resources in this country. These violent acts are often carried out with impunity because of the legal system in the DRC and the lack of justice to the survivors. So women face significant barriers entering professions like aviation, not only because of the direct violence they experience, but also because of the systematic exclusion of women from education and formal employment. The international community, again, led by the United Nations Humanitarian Organization, has worked to address CRSV in DRC by advocating for reform in the legal system, offering medical and psychological support for survivors, but they have never been enough. There's more that needs to be done. The efforts by the peacekeeping and peace building forces have been instrumental in providing security in some areas, but they have never been sufficient. So it's very crucial to pushing for more in terms of peace agreements that could include women rights and involvement in post-conflict reconciliation or reconstructions. So those are some important bets that needs to be done. There are direct and indirect consequences of sexual violence in this country. These are compounded by limited access to education, professional training for women, and because majority of women in rural or conflict-affected areas are unable to access to vocational trainings or education. So it has basically become a barrier to them to be able to access opportunities only because of their genders. On the other hand, in urban areas mostly, there may be some opportunities, but again, societal perceptions, cultural barriers, these have restricted women's mobility, and that is kind of one of the problems in the country, not letting women to enter sectors like aviation, which is more male-dominated. Again, the international community, the diplomacy, they have been advocating for women's rights and inclusion of them in the post-conflict recovery phase. But again, as I said, those are not really enough, and a lot more needs to be done to address issues such as GBV and CRSV. There is a very strong push for gender-sensitive reforms also on the government policy and private sector, including the aviation sector. But again, as I said, there are limitations that, although some policies might be in place, but implementation of them have become an issue most of the time. So how does all these connect to the aviation sector is important. I'll skip some of the parts that I have to discuss. I'll just straight jump into the policy recommendations, because discussing about the problem and not having a solution, I think this will just become so limited in terms of dispatching the information that we want to talk and discuss to the audience. So I would just jump into what we could do basically to address issues like this. Some of the key policy recommendations that we can make in terms of addressing the GBV and CRSV. I think one important thing is that countries must sign and implement international treaties like Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. Diplomatic efforts can help to push governments basically to prioritize signing these treaties. CRSV must be included in peace agreements and ceasefire negotiations because these are one of the most important efforts that could happen during the recovery time after the conflict is over in any settings. I think also the other thing that needs to be done in terms of policies is that the aviation organizations, they must adopt and anti-harassment and anti-violence policies. These policies should create clear reporting mechanisms and ensure that victims are protected. Because most of the time when someone is affected by issues of GBV and CRSV, one of the problems is that there's no uh, policy in place in countries that would protect the victims. So victims keep silent, and then these problems get more and more without being addressed. Another point that I would like to make here is that in conflicts such as like Afghanistan or DRC, there should be women should be included in peace building efforts, because it's very important that their voices are heard, and they are the people who are talking about their problem. So to basically integrate them in discussions for a long-term recovery plan, that can help. And finally, what's more important is capacity building and education. There should be a support towards educational and vocational training programs. At the international level, diplomatic efforts can help that. And these should be convinced for women in conflict zone, ensuring that they have tools to enter any industry that they would like to, including the one in aviation. And supporting women's access to these kind of opportunities is critical, basically in terms of capacity building and education. And I think to put them in context, to have them involved and basically included in discussions can really help, because they know more of what they have experienced than others to talk about them. So what I would say here, to just to be mindful of the time, I think we only have 2 to 3 minutes. In conclusion, I can say that women in aviation have an opportunity to lead the change, and not just the industry, but also in the society at large. Those who are in the industry, women who have excelled and basically found their ways in a very male-dominated industry of aviation. The only thing I can say is I applaud you, and and you should be proud of what you have achieved so far. Because in an industry that's very much male-dominated, it's not an easy thing to find your way and lead sectors, and you all have done that, and congratulations on that. So by understanding that the connection between GBV and CRSV, it's very important to basically advocate for policies in your workplaces to basically protect women, to create equal opportunities. If you are in the positions that can convince the policies, you should. If you are not, you have to talk about it and make sure that everyone is heard and women are included in decision making, to basically build a safe and inclusive environment for all to work. And again, as a diplomat, I can say that as diplomat and leaders, we have the responsibility to advocate for safer workplaces, gender equality, and the protection of women from violence. We should be pushing for frameworks, policies, treaties that addresses GBV and CRSV, and advocate for more inclusive policies in industries that are much more male-dominated and have not been addressed in the past couple of years. This is a very long journey. We need to work towards it. It's not one day or 2 day work. This needs consistent advocacy, lobbying, and I think we can all work together to basically ensure that the next generation of women, at least in any industry that are male-dominated, including aviation, they can thrive without the burden of the violence or discrimination because of their gender. I think I'll just finish it off here because I think we're just 3 minutes away from the time to be over on Zoom. But I wish to thank you all again for your time. Thank you so much. If there's any questions, I think the time is very, very short. If I can take it, I'll take it. If not, feel free to write to me. I'll email you back with the answers. Or if you want to, if that's more difficult, I'm also happy to connect over any other social media platforms, including WhatsApp, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Just let's stay in touch. If there's anything I could help with the efforts you all are undertaking towards addressing some of the most pressing issues in the aviation sector, including discrimination in aviation and based on gender, I'd be happy to support that. And thank you again, everyone, for your time. I wish you all the very, very best. Let's stay in touch, and thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope this was a good opportunity to discuss, at least to basically kick off what the discourse, so we can have a food for thought of thinking about how we could make the change, what are the problems, and what we as individuals can do, and what we as leaders or managers who are working in the industry and are in the workplaces can do to help the situation. I wish you all the best. Thank you so much, and you all have a good night. Thank you. That's all for me. Anything, Lynn, you would like to add, or anyone else? I'm sorry that I don't know anyone else here, because Lynn has contacted me and I was basically coordinated through her. I'm basically referring to her every time. But thank you all, everyone. Rocky, Parisa, Ravati. I hope I can take the name properly. Divya and Trisha. Arpi, thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. We'll keep in touch. Bye-bye.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Have a good one. Bye.